So let's take a look at the boots now. Now let's start from the rubber soles here. So I'm going to hold down C and press Shift. Now I want to apply a simple rubber texture here, so I'm going to search for rubber. And we have a couple of options here as always. So I want to go for something that's fairly low specular, like the rubber grip here. Black rubber looks like it could be another good option, but we are getting a lot of Fresnel going on the sharper angles here. So I like this one a bit better. I think this looks like a more realistic kind of shoe material. So I'm going to choose the rubber, hit create. Now because I didn't go back up to all, it's asking me, would you like to create this material in the currently selected group? Now if you want to combine materials, say for example you have the skin and fingernails that you want to group together, you can do that. But because I didn't go back up to all, I'm just going to hit no, and I want this to be its own individual layer group. Okay, so it's applied the rubber grip here, and we have our own individual group now. And I'm just going to zoom around just a little bit here. Now this is a good texture so far, but I need to adjust the scaling of the texture itself. We may need to alter the normals to change this. There we go, we're getting something that matches the scale a bit better. Okay, so moving on, let's apply the leather into this material group here. So holding down C, pressing Shift, clicking on the boots. So in the material browser, I'm going to type in leather. And you want to take a look at each of these presets, but I'm fairly familiar with these, so I want to choose the leather armor option and hit create. And I don't want to add this to the current group. Okay, so now that we've created the leather armor for the shoes, you'll notice there's a few problems with using some of these really complicated presets. It doesn't generally know how you want your model to appear. This has roughly done a fairly decent job. We're getting a bit of wear at the front, we're getting a bit of darkness towards the top. And let's take a look at the group here. So we have a few things that we need to change here. Now we have the fine leather base. Now let's reduce the scale on this one to begin with down to -4. And that's probably decreased the texture just a little bit. So I'm going to turn that back up to -3. That's a bit better. Now we have the color variation. Now this is another texture, so I'm going to reduce this down to -2. We have the dark stains, so again, reduce this down to -3. And lastly we have the edge wear. So you can see there's a bit of an advantage to taking a simplistic base texture and building on top of it, as compared to using one of these highly detailed presets. Now the reason why I say that is because this requires a little bit more tweaking, and we have to play with a lot of these values to get them right. And to get them looking correct, we have to desaturate a lot of things. We're going to have to change the opacity on a couple of the layers here, just to get the subtle variation that we want. Since I do want a bit of dirt and a bit of grime on the boots, but this is a bit too much for me. I like to have things looking a little bit more subtle. And I might change the scaling of the leather just to bring back some of this texture detail. Now, one important thing about texturing is not to always sit there looking super close at your objects. You want to zoom out from time to time and just sort of take in the entire appearance. Now, the first thing I notice is the colors aren't particularly matching We can tweak those later, but I'm pretty happy with the boots. I'm going to change the dark stain opacity just a little bit more, since I've zoomed out and I can see it's a very, very obvious effect. And we want it to be a little bit more subtle, and to kind of match the darker stains that we have on the pants as well. So that's looking a bit better. I want to tweak these colors a bit more. So I'm going to add a brand new blank layer. And I want to make this into a more of a reddish color, so I'm going to sample part of the material down the bottom here and just sort of find a reddish color. You can see here, this is the area of the boots in the background. Now this is going to be a little bit more like the original texture, but I want to set this blending mode here to multiply, and then tweak the opacity just a little bit here, just so we get a nice sort of tinted color. And 60% seems to be working quite nicely, and you can see more the colors are a bit more in line. Now for the last piece here, before we start tweaking the specular values for the body, is the jacket itself. So holding down C, pressing Shift, and for this one I want to choose a simplistic polyester. So I'm just going to type in poly into the search, and I think we can go with the simple white polyester, or possibly the red. I'm going to go with the white one. And now that we've applied our white polyester, let's go into the group. And I want to change my base cloth reflectance. So I want to change the base color of this. Now I want something similar to the boots. So instead of trying to pick a color here, I'm going to go to sample and just sort of grab a color from the boots here and just start from there. Now I want this to be a slightly more lighter color, as I don't want to lose too much of the detail. And that's looking good for a base color, just to begin with. Now we want to change the normal noise just a little bit here. Okay, so now that we have our base color and our normal noise, let's create a new clean layer. And we can start adding some highlights and shading to this. So I'm going to change the reflectance value. And it's going to grab one of these browns from up here. And let's mask out this color. So for the first mask, I want to go with the edges. And I want to tweak this curvature just a little bit here. So I'm going to open up the options. And I want to change the brightness up to be a little bit stronger. I want this effect to be a bit more pronounced. And I want to change the contrast up just a little bit more too. And what I want is sort of semi-sharp highlights going around this jacket here. And you can see it's sort of getting those. Now let's finish with this, and we can start blending the layer itself. So I'm going to change the blending mode from normal to screen here, just so we're not losing too much of the detail in the background. And I want to tweak the opacity down. Now let's add in another clean layer. And change our reflectance value. I'm going to sample from up here again and just make this a darker color. Now let's open up the Dynamask again, and we're going to make some cavity shading here. Now, it's always good to experiment with these masks just to see what kind of effects you can get, what kind of results you'll get. Now, this is probably a little bit too subtle. I may need to change the color of this mask just a little bit. And I think I need to make the highlights a bit more subtle here. So for now, I'm just going to hit done. And I want to change the color here of the shading just a bit. So I'm going to choose one of the base colors and just drop down the color just a little bit, just so we're getting some nice shading going on here. Is it okay? Okay, that's a bit better. Now I'm going to tweak the color for the highlights by doing the same thing. And just slowly stepping it up. And I want to desaturate the highlights just a little bit. That's looking better. Now I want to get some really sharp detail. I want to pull these edges right out. So I'm going to add another clean layer. And just chuck in our brown color. And in the mask editor here, I want to do a sharp edges. So I'm going to choose the sharp edges preset. And I want to use this to sort of pick out this existing detail and offer a bit more color variance with the highlights here. So I'm going to take a look at the curvature, take a look at some of this detail down here. So what I'm looking at here is I want to try bring the edges of the normals out a bit more. So I can do that by tweaking the curvature and opening up the options here. And I can change the brightness up a bit more. And change the contrast. Now, depending on what kind of effects you want for your model, you'll change all of these settings. So I highly encourage going through and experimenting with all of these different presets, trying out all the different types of blending modes, and seeing what each of these combiners do and what kind of results you can get with them. And there's a lot of things you can do, and there's a few limitations of course, but for the most part you can combine all of these different effects to create some really amazing masks. And of course you can actually paint custom layers too, and we have some basic sort of functionality down here. So we have the save as the new preset. So if you tweak up a mask that you really like and you want to use repeatedly, you can actually save that and it'll appear in this list here. Of course you can delete selected presets, and if we go into the paint custom layers here, we can actually come down into the mask itself, and I'll move the Dynamask window out of the way for this, and you can see I was actually just painting down there by hand. So if you have a graphics tablet, this is actually a good way to put it to use and paint some masks, but for this I want to just stick with using just the presets here, as you can spend hours experimenting and trying stuff out. Now I'm going to thicken up these edges a little bit by changing the preset, and I want to change the curvature. See, that's probably a little bit too much. And that's getting to where I kind of want it to be. And you can see this is starting to bring out the highlights a bit too much. Now there's a bit more variation in color, which is good, but it's pulling out the highlights just a bit too far. So I'm going to change the reflectance here and just grab this nice median color, slowly pull it up, and I'm going to change it just a little bit to add a bit more yellow in, and the yellow will make it look a bit more worn, but we don't want to push it too far, so I'm going to push it a little bit more towards white. Now I'm going to come back to the original highlight down here, and I want to change the opacity just a bit more, just to drop this entire effect down. And this is the process of using this program, is to basically come through, create something quickly, and then just refine, refine, refine. Now, as I was saying before, the presets do look really nice, but there's a certain value to having a very simplistic texture and building on top of it, and it'll give you a better appreciation of how textures should be assembled, the kind of effects that you want to go for with things like this. Now that I've done this, I really do want to desaturate the base layer a bit more, as I think we're getting a bit too dark with the colors here. Now this desaturated color looks a bit better, and I definitely need to tweak the speculars for all of these maps next. Now I'm pretty happy with the results, but I think I need to spend a little bit more time working on this jacket. But for just a really basic introduction to how these materials work and how to add in effective layers, I think this is a pretty good demonstration. I think the last thing I'd probably do would be to add a clean layer in, go with a darker color, and make a bit more damage like we did for the pants as well, by using a sort of a rougher mask. I might actually go with the sandy dirt again, to see what kind of results I get first. And you can see there that's looking a bit better, but I don't like the way that this is blending, so I'm going to hit done. And I'm going to experiment a little bit here with the different types of blending modes. So let's try multiply first, and that's pretty dark, so let's drop down the opacity and slowly creep it back up again. And we're getting a little bit of noise, so I'm not particularly happy with how that's blending, so let's try an overlay here, or maybe a soft light. Now that's getting a little bit of the detail. I'm going to look at the back of the model now, just to see what we're getting here. And we're getting little flecks of black, which is sort of what I want. We don't want her jacket to be too dirty, but we do want a little bit of variance in this sort of really simple leather material here. So I'm going to add a new material in, and I want to add in something a bit noisy. So coarse rust is probably a good one. Might actually go with the dirty rubber, because this is going to be blending quite nicely. So I'm going to use the dirty rubber preset here and apply a sort of overall damage. Now this is looking good. I can change the scale down a bit. Now I've got the scale of my new texture in here, and this is fitting quite well, so I'm going to tweak some of these blending options here. Now I might try soft light to begin with, just to make this a bit more subtle, and I'm going to change the secondary blending mode to overlay, and let's turn down the opacity just a little bit here, just to see what kind of blend that we can get. And there's the combination that I want. So this is linear light blended with multiply at a fairly low opacity here, and I might tweak this down just a little bit more, and you can see we're getting good variation throughout the entire material here, and it's going to blend in the highlights a bit better. Those darker patches are going to blend in nicely, and we're just getting a visually appealing sort of material here. So now that that's finished, we've almost done all of the parts here, so the last two pieces are the belt and the buckle. So I'm going to quickly apply something to the belt here. Now I'm going to choose a cotton, because I know that the texture for the base is what I want, since this looks like a sort of a fabric belty material. And we have the cotton material here, so I'm going to enter the group and just change the base color rather quickly. I just want to drop this down to something closer to black, so we get a bit more detail there, and it's a bit different to the surrounding materials. And for the final piece, I'm going to go with the belt buckle and just quickly add a material here. Now instead of searching, I'm just going to go to the metal section here and just take a quick look at what I want. Now I want something that's fairly dull without too much reflection. Stained steel might be a decent option here. I'll try stained steel to begin with. Now, since this is a fairly small piece, we're not going to expect too much detail from this, but this is actually done okay. But again, if I zoom out and just take a look, I'm pretty happy with this. Okay, so now that we've finished with setting up all the basic material types here, we need to go through and tweak some of these specular values because the pants are way too bright. The jacket's getting pretty close to where it needs to be. You can see the skin tones. It's good skin tone, but the problem is it looks like she's extremely sweaty and maybe made out of plastic or something. So the boots also need quite a bit of tweaking. So I'm going to go back to the pt2 window and let's just go through the dark denim to begin with. Now instead of the albedo tab here, I want to switch over to the specular tab and we're going to take a look at some of these settings here. So with the specular tab active, I'm going to go into the group, and these are all the specular values for the old dark denim. So just keep in mind that every time you switch tabs, these values are going to change for their respective maps. And I want to go into the denim settings, and I want to just tweak down the overall brightness because yeah, it's way too bright. It's more like a vinyl or almost spandex in a way, and it just looks weird for this type of texture. So if I go to the base color, which is the denim, and I change the reflectance value here to something a bit lower, you should be able to see this tweaking pretty quickly. And you can see here the effects are a bit more controlled now. So what I want to do is just go through each of these and tweak them individually. Now I don't want to give too much prominence to these additional layers that I brought in. So I want the main specular to be controlled by these two base layers, which is the denim and jeans. So with the color fill selected, I want to just change the opacity down to, let's say, 40%. And you can see this is going to reduce those colors that were introduced before, and we're going to fix a lot of the issues with the specular here. So I'm going to drop this one down to 40 as well. And the noise down to 40. And that's starting to look a bit better. It's not such a shiny metallic sort of appearance. I do need to tweak this down a bit further, so I need to tweak the jeans to be a little bit darker, and then the base color to be closer to black, since you don't really expect jeans to be casting a lot of specular highlights, so it's not going to be reflecting a bunch of light, but you do want some of the bounces to occur just to make it look a bit better. So that's looking good now. I want to go back up to all. Now the next one I want to do is take a look at the boots. So that's the leather armor, and into the group. Now I'm just going to find where the boots are, which I believe were up here. And I want to do the same thing again. So these new colors that we introduced, I want to make sure that they're not contributing too much to the speculars of the boots themselves. That's why we're getting this over shiny appearance. It's because all those additional layers that we added, and some of the custom layers as well, are going to have their own independent specular values, and we're going to get some pretty bright results. So I don't want to do it too much, but I might drop down the fine leather specular as well here. And as I mentioned towards the start of this section, this is a process of refinement. You're never going to get a perfect texture straight away. You need to take a look at how things look and how it's going to look in engine, and especially if you're bringing this out to UDK, you will get different results to what you see in 3D here. And that's actually okay, because there's a few options you have up here, and one of the best ones is the toggle cross app mode. and this allows you to work on your textures while they're in engine, and you can automatically update the materials without having to worry about exporting and redefining materials in UDK. So for now, I'm pretty happy with this. I would go through and tweak a few things further. I would probably add a little bit more mud around the boots, and probably I need to tweak down the skin texture as well. So I'm going to go into the skin group here and just sort of drop this down a bit more. Now I just want to change the base color and possibly the volume color, just so we're getting a lot less of that shininess going on. These values are just way too bright, and that's looking a bit better now. So if I hold down shift and just left click, just move the HDR around, yeah, I'm getting much better results now. And skins generally very non-specular. You don't want to include very much specular in the skins at all, since it's just going to look kind of weird in game, and it's going to look like it's made from a material that it's not actually made from. So you generally want to go very subtle with this, and yeah, that's getting a bit better now. So let's just turn down the greens a little bit here. Now you can see the reds were contributing quite a bit here. Now that's probably a little bit too much. Now, since it's a game texture, you generally want a little bit of specular just to really bring out the details, but not so much so that it looks like it's wet or maybe a different type of plasticky material. And because it's a semi-realistic model, you want to introduce a couple of non-realistic elements, which is maybe overly shiny skin, which is fine. So with this all sorted out, the boots are good, the pants are good, the shirt and jacket are good, and the skin is good. And I might actually change the speculars on the pants, but for now we're just going to move along, and we're going to finish up the head of the model, and there's not much to finish here. So the quickest way to use all of these materials that we've been tweaking here is I'm going to come back to the albedo tab. So I want to reuse this skin texture here, and I want to reuse it for the face. So with the skin group selected here, I'm going to come up to save a new smart material. And this is where you can start saving off your own custom presets here. So when you go to add a new smart material from 3Do by pressing C and Shift and clicking, this new skin material is actually going to appear in that list for us. Now once you've saved the preset, you'll get 3Do updating with the custom preset in the background, and you can just sort of preview what you've made here, and I'm going to hit OK. And I want to close this copy of 3Do, and let's start 3Do back up again. So now that I've saved off the skin preset, that's the only preset that I wish to reuse from the body model. So I'm going to change from the body to the head now, and we're going to start working on the head texture. So make sure that your active texture is the one that you want before you press C and Shift. And I'm going to click, and once the material browser opens up, you have this shared custom folder here, and when you click on it, you have all the different types of skin, and here's a couple of presets that I made previously. But I want skin number 01, and this is the preset that we used on the body, so I'm going to create that for the head. And this just provides a much faster way to go through and just work with your model. And there are a few changes that I want to make to the face. Generally I don't want it to be so porous and lumpy, so I'm going to come to the normals, and for the skin preset here, I just want to change the opacity down just a little bit here to get some of that original normal back. And same with the specular as well. So I want more of the original specular showing, since it's a bit more focused as well. And yeah, that's looking good so far. So once you've established a couple of basic material types for the body, you can go ahead and apply those to the rest of the character. And as I was showing you before, you don't necessarily need to overwrite your base materials that you created. So if you like for example, the pants again, if you like the old dark denim, but you don't want the color, you can actually change all of this. So if I set this to screen, and this is the original base material, so I'm not losing any of the speculas here, and you can see we still got the damage, we still got the normal detail here. Now if I wanted to remove any of these parts, I can just switch to normal. In the old dark denim, just drop down the opacity of the normal map for this material group, and we can smooth things out a bit more here and make it look a bit less like denim pants and more like the original base texture. And we can go through and do the same thing for any of the parts that we want to tweak. The options are basically endless with D2, as long as you know how to take a base preset, apply it to the model and make a few changes to it, and you should be able to create your own presets. Now for things like the hair, this is mostly a question of just tweaking some specular values, because the base texture that you've created should be able to suit this quite fine. And if you want to tweak any of these specific textures, don't forget that this is in Photoshop. So if I close or minimize 3D here, you can edit all of these layers that we've been creating here. So if I just open up the layers group and go all the way to the top, and just collapse some of these, you can actually see the corresponding layers in your layer stack in Photoshop. And you can go through, you can change any of the masks, you can change any of the colors using just purely the layers here, and you can add or remove details as you please. So it's a very, very powerful texturing system. The possibilities are just endless with Photoshop and combined with D2. And with 3D, you can actually preview and visualize a lot of your material types, save them out for other projects. You can build your own library of presets and just really increase your workflow when it comes to texturing characters. So for this video, that's going to be all I'll be showing you. I highly recommend going through and really exploring the Dynamasks. There's a lot of fun stuff you can do with masking in this, and definitely check out the material browser. And don't rely too heavily on the preset materials. There's a lot of power with being able to add your own layers and make your own changes. So that's it for this video, and have fun with D2.